James, it's easy for a pastor to get pretty consumed with what's right in front of him. His own ministry, his own struggles with his people, with their people, and the community. Especially, we want to be local churches that are trying to reach our community, and we can get consumed with that. In fact, I remember one of the first things that I heard from a member of the church that I pastored when I was talking about global missions was, well, we need to focus. Look at all the problems we have here. They actually were opposed to it.
Yes.
So, how important is it for pastors to have some kind of vision of global missions? And then how do they accomplish that?
Yeah. Well, I think any pastor trying to lead his congregation beyond his local community to have a vision for global evangelization has probably met some kind of feedback like that. We have lost people right here. What are we going to do to reach them? But there are two reasons we need to care. I mean, the first is obviously because the Great Commission calls us to it.
Right.
We were called to take the gospel to the nations, and so we have a responsibility. But then also, and this is a key for a pastor to understand, one of the ways to stir a fervor or zeal for evangelism in your local community is to take people to the other side of the world and let them see the need for the gospel in other places. Some of the best evangelists in your local church may be spurred on in their evangelism by going to see what God is doing around the world. And so it can bear a lot of fruit. One of the ways that God has used a focus on the nations at our church over the last decade is to draw our minds beyond just the local church and what sometimes get confused as the kingdom of God. We can sometimes think that the kingdom of God is this local church. It was actually global,
Right.
and this is just a small piece of that. And so it can give us the right perspective that the local church is, of course, very important, but it's only a piece of what God is doing around the world. And so sometimes it can just help change the perspective of people and help them see that the kingdom of God is bigger than just this local area. So it can be a strategy. But, you know, in your own ministry, as you've sent out so many pastors, and I can imagine that that's helped to develop relationships with the global work just in sending out these folks.
Yeah, I just, one of the greatest joys I had as a pastor is to see God's call on someone's life for missions and help raise them up and train them and care for them and help them figure out where to go and how to do that. I would say still to this day, it's one of the greatest joys I've experienced. And some of those people were some of my closest friends. So there was a cost, and you send out your best. You send out those, you're not sending them to the next state. You can drive over and see them a couple of times a year. Like you're sending them to the other side of the world. And so there's a sacrifice in doing that. So there's going to be a temptation to not do that because there's a cost. But I would say that one of the things that is so enjoyable and fruitful for our local church is to not just support missionaries, but to pray and ask God to raise people up from within the congregation. And you're sending people who you know well, who you love. You remember when they weren't ready to go to the mission field, and God works and you send them. And that local church gets to be a part of everything they're doing on the mission field in that way. And of course, the book of Acts, I mean, the whole New Testament points to how much local churches are supposed to continue to be involved in that role with the missionaries. And so I'm a huge advocate for, obviously, not just global missions. I would hope most pastors would say that.
That's right.
But I want to advocate, when we talk about this for this particular week, pastors praying and really seeking God's call on others in their life. I remember one of the most impactful things that I did in our ministry at one point, on me personally and others, was we took time to pray for the children in our church, that God would raise them up and send them. We actually challenged the parents, sitting there, 25, 30-year-old parents, young kids, and already challenging them, planting the seed of, are you willing to send your child to a dangerous place so the gospel could go if God calls them? So don't miss how there are things you can do as you pastor a church regularly to help a church create a culture, a sending culture, a culture of that the gospel is bigger than just our local church here, and what God's doing in the world is much bigger. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, starting out by loving those who have already been sent is great. But what you're talking about is sending those that you love because they're part of your family, which is very powerful in the life of the local.
it's another reason to stay a long time at a church if you
That's right.
can,
Yeah.
to be able to watch children be born and then watch them get married and maybe go to the mission field. Yeah, there's nothing like it.